So first rule, as we mentioned in the green room back there, is we're not going to ask you all to wait on your questions. If you have a question because of these rock stars' awesome comments, just jump in and ask it. Don't wait till the end. But we will try to carve out enough time for Q&A. So just to kind of kick things off, maybe 2-3 minutes in your own words. Carrie, we'll start with you. On what you're up to at Abaxx, a bit about your background, just contextualize the conversation a bit.
I am Carrie Jaquith. I'm a global head of product at Abaxx Technologies. At Abaxx, we're a fintech startup. We're operating at the intersections of fintech, data, commodities markets, the energy transition, some really, really unique spaces that we get to work in. And before I joined Abaxx Technologies, I had the amazing opportunity to stand up digital enablement at AXA within their enterprise data vertical, and before that, got to head up emerging technology at Lazard Fair. So I'm one of those humans that loves to work at the intersections of product, data science, and the humans.
Thank you, Carrie. I couldn't have said it better. Thank you, DSS, for having us right after lunch. So it should be an energizing session, hopefully. My name is Pritham. I'm the business lead for personal loans at SoFi. SoFi is also a fintech. We went public last year. We offer products for customers to better their financial health every day. We have deposit products, loan products, transaction products like credit card, invest, etc. My background, similar to Carrie's, is centered around user experience, data, and financial services. So how can you use data to help people manage their money better is the problem that I'm trying to solve. Looking forward to the conversation.
All right, perfect. So we'll kick things off here. This is going to be a little bit less of the technical side and a little bit more of how the technical intersects with the business, and a lot of the different elements of the questions that I think we all have to answer every day. And shout out to the previous panel when they were talking a lot about, I think, the idea of quote unquote selling into stakeholders, right? And a lot of the different languages that are inherent within the business. The data science team has a language, quote unquote non-technical business leaders have a language, right? Carrie's smiling, and we go way back, so there's a lot of great history here to kind of touch on. But my first question for you all is, and Carrie, you mentioned it, right? Minimum viable fluency. Right? So whether that's within the data science team to collaborate and work more effectively, or with the data science team's ability to interact with the rest of the business to secure financing or move forward on an initiative, what are your all's thoughts? And Carrie, I'm just going to keep passing the mic to you, and then we'll go to Pritham and vice versa. But what are your thoughts on how data science teams can best position themselves to collaborate with non-technical business stakeholders? And what are a little bit of the do's and the don'ts and the nuances?
Oh, sure. It's such a great question. I'm a big believer in pairing humans to increase fluency and building a minimum viable fluency within your team so that every single person on your team, from your cloud engineer to your data modeler to your user researcher to your data scientist, like everyone needs to at least have a minimum viable way to talk about what we do. And we need to be able to explain it with pictures, crayon level pictures, and with words. The do's are to ask questions. Do ask, do you have concerns? Do ask, does this make sense? Do not assume that when you show your model in an overhead projection and it has symbols, do not assume that everyone understands those symbols. Do translate it for your audience. Do build up a fluency to be able to translate. Very simply, what will happen if I run this model, this I think will happen. Answer the question of what will happen if. What will I do with this? Can I do this? Do ask what's going into it. Build fluencies around super basic classifications of data, because at the end of the day, what we're working with is data. So if you can't like super simply explain, hey, I'm gonna take first names and last names, and I'm gonna do something with it. Very, very simply be able to explain the if and then. I will take your first name and last name, I will do a thing, and then you will find out another thing. I think that's like that minimum viable, super key.
Very well put. I'll just say when collaborating, it's important to have role clarity. So if I'm a subject matter expert at, let's say, marketing, and I'm working with like a data science person, I can kind of educate that person on, hey, here are things that we need to watch out for in the data. Maybe the data has some bias that you need to control for. Or maybe there is scenarios that you can run with the output of the model to capture other things that did not happen in the past and that may happen in the future. So when you set up a conversation with a data person, or if you are a data person, taking perspectives for a second, if you are a data person and you're having a conversation with a functional expert like a marketer, then your job should be to gather information from them and to learn about the problem that they're trying to solve, the bounds of the outcomes, the probability that what happened in the past will repeat in the future, and what kind of scenarios that they want to see, right? And taking the counter perspective, if you're a marketer talking to a data science person, you need to be able to understand what their process of collecting data, extracting data, manipulating data is, and how that may influence the way you make decisions, right? So I think it's important for both parties to align and understand one another and do that right at the beginning. So I think that will be helpful.
Those are both great answers. I appreciate that. And Pritham, you mentioned something there that got my attention, and I wonder, do marketers, right, in your business and in your experience, are there tips that you might give a marketer to self-educate, right, or resources they could look into to become more fluent and conversational in certain areas, to become more effective in collaborating with you? Any thoughts on something of that nature?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think everyone that is in a functional domain today needs to understand how to read and manipulate data, and how to talk the data language, right? Because it's such a big competitive advantage. The things that I would say are, there are basic courses and basic jargon that you can educate yourself on as a marketer. That is used ubiquitously, right? Like that's used everywhere. There is basic, once you understand the jargon and understand how to read the results of a model or read how to use data, then you can go on to more of understanding algorithms and understanding tools and techniques of using and manipulating. There are, again, multiple courses for that. But I would also encourage people to use their peer network and data science organizations within their organization to kind of develop that fluency. I would also think that it's more of a journey rather than just a one-time thing, right? So as you go deeper and as you start to see the power and enhance your skill set as a marketer, you will start to, kind of also enjoy the process, is what I think.
That's great. Super helpful. And I think natural kind of, segue and transition to some of the innovation questions, right? And thinking about, one of the things that I have experienced in particular over the years is that the more you understand, the deeper you go, to your point, Pritham, the more you realize, oh my gosh, I have to rethink a lot of things, right, about what's possible. And you can fall into a trap of, trying to innovate everywhere, right, which not necessarily a good idea. So, Carrie, I know that, we've talked in the past about innovation frameworks and thinking around that. So I wonder if you could maybe help the audience understand a little bit about how you process and think through dimensions of frameworks when it comes to thinking about innovation within the context of data science, product, and just in general, because it's a wonderful topic. I know we both have in common.
For sure. Well, when I think about where I'm working right now, we're building with and for data science. We're a financial services and financial technology company building within the regulatory frameworks that many of us here, since this is a, how many in the audience are working in FinServ? So for those of you dialed in on the live stream, like most of the arms went up in the audience. So I joke that we work in the land of no. Can we try this? Can we try this experiment? No. But what about if we did? Nope. But okay, so what if we, nope. And when you're working in financial services, sort of the game of working in financial services is figuring out where the boundaries are. And those boundaries hold up for innovation. Those boundaries hold up for the real work. So in my day-to-day, we're building with data science, and in the public domain, like you would see the work of our chief economist, David Greeley, is publishing work that is driven by data science. What you wouldn't see in the public domain, our risk team is building risk models that we won't necessarily make public, but that's driven by data science. And then we're building for data science, and this is where we sit kind of at that innovation space, but still cognizant of and mindful of and regulatorily compliant with the regs. We're building for data science, and one of the more compelling aspects of that work sits with our ID++ protocol, which is an open identity protocol, and how we're embedding and weaving that into authentication and attestation and identity. Like that's a space that is innovative, right? There's an area for data science where there's a lot of innovation around this. And at the same time, the framework that you have to operate with is what's the question I need to ask? What is the why? Why do I need to experiment with this? And then how? And in terms of practical application of innovation, we look at where our guardrails are. Sometimes those are minimum viable, very quick guardrails that we can stand up and say, okay, we can stand up a sandbox. It's going to be totally compliant. We can run an experiment here. Sometimes there are experiments and innovations that I take outside of my organization into academia. And so I'll run the experiment in academia with my students in a place that has different guardrails and where I can ethically, compliantly run an experiment. So I look at those to come back to your question of like, what's the framework that you work with? The framework for me for innovation is what's the why? Why do I need to innovate? What's the driver? What do the humans need out of this? What will happen if? Is it a just because I can? Does it mean I should? I have to always be able to answer that question in finance. and then where are the places that I can run the experiment?
I'll go back to one of the points that you were making. It's very easy to get lost in the details, especially with models. All you're doing is breaking the data down, and you feed data into a model, and suddenly you have this big tree with like 100 nodes, right? So I think a practical way, at least how I look to solve that problem, is constantly synthesize, right? So as soon as you break it down into 5 nodes, then you're kind of going back and synthesizing and looking at it from a different point of view. That's where I think talking to people or getting a second opinion actually really helps, and having someone that can go at the model and challenge it and say that, hey, this is an overfitting problem. This really will not happen in real life. Can be something that can be really useful to have to avoid that, kind of getting lost into the details problem. Going back to your question on, hey, how can you think about innovation? Data science is a continuous spectrum, as Carrie alluded to, starting with, collecting the data, storing the data, having the right technology, processing and manipulating the data to get it to a right spot, building actionable insights, and finally using them for decision making. Within each of those buckets, you can have tech enhancements, right? So my framework would be like, you have the verticals, and then you can think about tech. Within tech, it can be how can you process the data faster, for example, how can you store and access the data easily, for example. And within the process kind of domain, it can be, hey, how do you make the data more integrated? So how does, let's say, for example, you're marketing to a bunch of customers, how does the risk team then analyze the risk of that marketable population, and you reduce the loss of information between the two parties, right? So that is like a process type question that I think has to be continuously iterated on. The technology is more a long-term, 3-5 year kind of solve, but something, a process innovation has to be daily, weekly, monthly, is how I think about it.
Throwing it back to you, Alec. This is the beauty of the one mic. We get to ask the questions. Yes. Something that you and I have talked about a little recently is the idea of innovation as replacement versus innovation as augmenter. And there's this element in data science. There's a stream of work that's happening where the work is very focused on data science as an augmentation tool. Data science as an add-on, data science as a clip-on to something that already exists, to a process that already exists. And because of where you're situated in the world and the visibility you have across domains, I'm super interested to hear what you see in terms of signals or markers around augmentation application versus replacement, wholly replacing process.
Appreciate it. I'll keep it brief because I'm supposed to be asking the questions, but I love answering them too. If they're relevant, I can be helpful. So there's two things that come to mind. One is concurrency, and the other is when you help an organization understand the way that data that kicks off of a very a process and or an infrastructure and system part, but how that data can actually inform decision making in a lot of other diverse horizontal territories. So to give an example to make it more tangible, Pritham, you mentioned marketing data and MarTech. Sometimes we tend to forget that a lot of the data that happens that is the results of human beings interacting with businesses is some of the most powerful data set that you could possibly imagine, right? Because it's not a hypothetical, it's not a focus group, it's an actual data set associated with a consumer's satisfaction or lack thereof with a business or B2B, et cetera. And so unpacking the way that you can apply some pretty heavy duty horsepower to take those data sets and translate them to corporate strategy, right, initiatives, or translate them to more effective marketing campaigns upstream, product innovation, service innovation. A lot of all of those different territories are a little bit on the spectrum of when the light bulb goes on in those other business units, when those folks start to understand. And I think you tend to start with enhance and augment, right, before you crawl, walk, run into, oh my gosh, we could actually do something along these lines, right, and start it from scratch, which feels a little bit like a kind of a gray answer to your question, but I hope that helps answer the question. Yeah? Good segue as well. I appreciate you asking me a question. Anyone in the audience have a question? I promise I won't call on anybody, but you all should definitely ask questions because I'm sure you have better ones than I do. Camera just went up and I thought, oh, that was not a question. Oh, here we go. Yes, excellent. Please go ahead. Mm. Yeah, I'll just do my best to repeat the question, right? So the question revolves around the people process / technology aspect, which aspect or multiple aspects with selling in models and how transparency, like a platform, for example, could help with that, or maybe other aspects. So Pritham, I see you nodding. I'm going to pass the mic to you. That you might have some thoughts on this, but great question, and thank you for that.
Yeah, I think successful organizations always look to maximize the use of data. I can definitely speak for one of the organizations I worked for in the past, and they did it very, very successfully, where they've built a model that updates real time, and anyone, anywhere in the firm can actually make changes to the model, and there is a process on how those changes are accepted. So, and you put your stamp on the model. It's kind of like, blockchain in a way, but not really. But the fact is that having such an open source system creates a lot of transparency, and it builds credibility because anyone can make changes, and if your change is good enough, it can actually make the cut, and it can be something that is incorporated into the already existing model. So I think that is something that successful organizations will definitely leverage. Also looking at, companies like Uber, for example, right? Like, again, I've not worked there, but I'm just going off of what I see on my Uber app. On rainy days, they definitely increase my price of a ride. I've also noticed, when I tend to order Ubers during certain times, and I repeat that pattern. For example, during COVID, I used to come into work, and sometimes I used to take Uber because I was late. The price went up after a couple of maybe a month and a half, so after they had enough data. So I don't think innovations like this and changes like these are automated. There has to be like a democratized way where there is a lot of participants that are creating these models, and all that is feeding like some kind of experiment / valuation model sitting at the top that's creating that outcome for the business. So I think there is definitely going to be that kind of future. That's my view.
100%. And I think where I've seen model marketplaces make a play, so there have been a couple of startups that have built out, they've stood up and built out marketplaces for algorithms. There are also some major financial services companies that create open platforms that allow you to provide or give your model to them. Those sort of the spaces where model aggregation as a service or as an open source ecosystem are provided, I think that's an incredible place to learn and to cultivate fluency. Ultimately, from the outside of the data science community, the question that comes up is who owns it, who's responsible for it when it goes wrong? Like those two things, because of the land of no. Those are the gotchas with that space. It's not impossible, but the idea that models are fixed in time and space and don't require ongoing care and feeding, like that. It's the how do you navigate the risk? How do you navigate the maintenance until decommission? Because things live until they're decommissioned. Those are. It's really interesting. It's a very interesting space.
I agree. The one thing I would add. And I think you all have touched on it, is intellectual honesty within an organization, right? So I think one of the biggest challenges that you can face with transparency around these different initiatives is whether or not folks are comfortable with their work being effectively put out in the public that way, right? Public meaning within the confines of the company, because sometimes the further along folks are in their career, sometimes they have a stronger and stronger point of view about how strong and right their point of view is, versus perhaps building on chain, right, literally and figuratively, and opening it up. And so that's something that I think is a really important leadership quality that you see in organizations that are wildly successful, embracing that type of an approach. Which, you can probably tell by the way I just described that, how much I appreciate that approach. But that being said, I'm going to throw out a little bit of a segue into another territory here that is informed by, I'm sure some folks might have experimented with ChatGPT or have been watching what's going on with OpenAI and whatnot. I'm seeing some nods. Okay. So for those that aren't, familiar with it, it's a big language model, and just recently 1 million people signed up to start chatting and interfacing with this massive language model. Within 72 hours, I think Sam Altman has already said that 1 million people are working with it. And one of the things I think is interesting is sometimes there's a moment in time that makes a lot more people, especially non-technical stakeholders, more aware of the power of, let's just call it AI or data science and dimensions of this, that can then breed, an opportunity to unlock, an opportunity to have a conversation about something new that perhaps you all have been waiting on, to have that conversation. And Carrie, you touched on, and I've known you for a while now, and I know that your inspiration for innovation and the way that you keep yourself connected to a lot of different types of organizations, and you do things in the culture of innovation that I think keeps you kind of cutting edge. And so I wonder, how do you envision the next 90 plus days of how this chat GPT might be adjusting the lens of non-technical, leaders within the financial community in particular that might be more on the Captain No side of the equation versus Captain Yes? And what gets you excited about, where this might go in the next, quarter or so?
The most exciting aspect of events like this are that they provide a human-friendly access point, a human-friendly user interface for humans that don't write code all day and who don't generate models and maintain models all day. The being able to for a human to create with a machine, either through ChatGPT or Midjourney, any of the engines that have a text interface where I can almost like use my phone to text in an input and get an output, those are watershed moments for the public at large that aren't steeped in academia, because those make data science accessible to normal people. So the impact of things like this is cannot be underplayed. If you are like me and you work in financial services, and if, like me, you got spammed with like 50 of your friends going, OMG, have you tried this? What have you tried? And if, like me, you saw ChatGPT try and convince Alec to eat Domino's pizza because it's the greatest pizza of all time. And if, like me, you sat with your think tank last weekend and hashed it, so you're all like, what are the things next? Then you might, like me, be thinking about the guardrails for financial services that you need to rapidly be able to stand up, like minimum viable guardrails for your teams, where you're saying like, okay, great, here's this very, very open input. Maybe as a first pass, you should only be allowed to, or you should consider, not a lawyer, maybe you should consider a guardrail around publicly available data being the thing that you experiment with. So maybe if it's data that you could put on the cover of the New York Times, that's a great experiment. Maybe if the output can also be put on the cover of the New York Times and no one goes to jail, maybe that's a great experiment. Maybe in aggregate, if 5 of the prompts that you input into the engine in aggregate can be viewed as not leaking IP, and in aggregate could also be put on the cover of the New York Times, like that's a good sandboxy guardrail for teams to speak broadly. This is the advice I would give any startup, any fintech startup. These are the things that you have to be mindful of. I actually think this is going to prompt, like this hits on a couple of areas of innovation that I'm super interested in. One of them is explainability through user interface. There's a gap in the market. We haven't solved for it. We have like really great user interface design for things like a print button where an image is representative of a string of actions. I think that the front ends of experiences like this are game changers because they simplify. There's an additional layer of interface that needs to get designed. There's going to be an opportunity around a truthfulness kit because the output from the engine is so believably human if the input prompt is good. If the imprompt, if you structure the input prompt correctly, the output has the texture of human conversation, of human created text. And so it is therefore super believable by humans. Humans will read it and they'll be like, this is very real. I should believe this to be true. And also it can explain to you, Alec, in prose, why Domino's is the greatest pizza of all time. And like that is a subjective, subjective. We have tools for training models where we correct, where we 5-star, where we thumbs up, thumbs down. We have like these small tools, but I think that there's going to be an innovation around truthfulness and trustfulness with tools like this. Sorry, I think it's still on forever.
Yeah? No. Pritham says Carrie covered it. Yeah. And I appreciate that, and it's exciting, needless to say. And for anyone that hasn't had a chance to experiment with it, I strongly encourage you to. Oh yes, I see a question. Just repeating the question, I think I heard it was, as a global product leader and head, the types of challenges that you come up with and think about every day, and perhaps how you think about them and prioritizing them. Is that about right? Okay.
Yeah. No, I think the challenges fall into 3 buckets in my view, right? One is, people, right, and their motivations and making sure, the data that's being represented, and the conclusions that are being drawn are actually relevant and actually make sense, right, beyond the motivation. So if you have data and if it's access for all, there is also open interpretation, which I think is a huge second order problem that needs to be solved. Like we've solved the ability to store and manipulate large data sets. We've solved the ability to process that information, to reduce the latency of when that information is available and who that information is available to. Now it's time to think about how that information is utilized and how you solve the data-rich, information poor drip problem, so to speak. I think that's number one. Number 2 is, how do you integrate data-driven decision-making or data-driven thinking into your processes? A lot of people, when they reach a problem or when they encounter a problem, are prone to using the mental models that they have, which are trained based on what they've seen in the past. But having a tool or having a consultative data set or a framework where you can go and interrogate that or ask a hypothesis-based question or do a hypothesis-based test, and doing that continuously and repeatedly to learn and sharpen your beliefs. So that is, I think, point number 2, which is like a process-driven thing. And how do you set up that process within the organization? Going back to point number 1, taking the people along, stitching the people together with the process. I think that's point number 2. And then point number 3 is more around technology, which is, in an organization that's running very fast, that has objectives every day, how do you bring in technological change that can drive innovation and that can make things easier for everybody? And how do you make those investments without disturbing what's already working and what's already going the way it should, right? So those are, I think, the 3 sets of challenges that, at least I see in my day-to-day job.
Those are 100% like same. People, I mean, the challenges that you run into in product are our goal is to build products, the dream. The dream is to build the products that serve our client or customer, that drive revenue, that optimize how we run things. And the challenge day to day is translating strategic goals and strategic visions into real world tools with humans and with timelines that are never long enough, with budgets that are never big enough, with team headcounts that are never big enough, with regulatory requirements that impose throttles and bottlenecks on what you're trying to do. And often we're building products in ecosystems where we're working with end users that are proxies for our ultimate end users. So in financial services, you may not always be able to talk directly to your end users, which is like one of the core tenets of building great product is like passion for the user and high communication with the user. But there are a lot of tools that we end up building that we can't directly communicate to an end user on, and we don't get to until we get closer to go live. And so you're working with proxy, speaking very broadly, not, again, disclaimer, speaking broadly about working in financial services. And this also holds up in healthcare. So that, like, as a day-to-day, learning how to navigate the unknown where you have to find the right proxy, where you're finding end users who are your proxy for who you're ultimately going to be working with. That is a real challenge. I think what's easy to forget when you see Pritham and myself on the stage is that we're not building products alone. What you're not seeing, and the only reason I'm able to sit here is there's a whole team building product with me. They're from UI design to user research to data modeling to data science to cloud engineering to cloud architect to, like, there are humans that are all adding up to being able to build a product. And it can be deceiving to see the title product manager and you have that moment of like, oh, that person's responsible for the whole product. And really it's very human. The humans are responsible for the whole product. It is a team effort.
Great question. I hope that was helpful. I think you all touched on a bunch of stuff there that I would love to double click into, but one thing, because I think it ties to a couple different areas, is the way that you think about the tools and the infrastructure that you all use to power what you're doing, right? And, Pritham, you mentioned the idea of data-driven organizations. That's a competitive advantage, and, you've been around some great ones, and I'm sure you can speak to that. But walk us through, how does the process work when perhaps there's a new technology or an aspect of an existing technology that causes you to think about, hey, there might be a better way to do this, there might be a better tool out there, we're using some legacy stuff here and we need to modernize it over here. How do you all think about technology choices and infrastructure and tools within the context of, is the juice worth the squeeze, basically? So we'll start here. Yeah.
That's an excellent question. I think it all has to start with a point of pain, right? And that point of pain can be from the customer. You hear customer complaints every day that this is too slow, I can't interact with the chatbot, I can't get my loan decision, momentarily, etc., etc. Or it can be with the person that's actually doing the work and using the technology. There is too many issues, I have to fight fires, I don't have peace of mind, I get woken up at 2 a.m. to fix something that shouldn't have been broken in the first place. Or it's something new, a paradigm shift in the market, and it's something that the industry is moving towards, and you're not thinking about it as an organization. So these are I think the 3 points of origination of the need, right? Like, you need to have a problem to solve. Once that is there, then you kind of start thinking about, okay, so if this is the problem that I need to solve, what are my existing resources? Why are they not capable of solving the problem? So you start with that. You try to see if there is a way your existing technology can actually scale to solve that problem. Because that's your easiest and most efficient way of solving the problem, also cost effective. If you're not able to do that, then you start to think about, okay, can I build something internally as an add-on to my existing technology to solve that problem? And then if you're not, there even, then you think about the last concentric circle, which is, hey, I probably need to go out and look for a vendor or a third party to solve the problem. Even there, I think there is multiple options in the market. There are different ways you can, kind of create an assessment framework, mapping back to the problem that you're trying to solve. So I think
Yeah, for sure. Tool selection it depends on the scale of your company. It depends on the timeline you're working with. It depends on the capabilities of your team. Those three, like how much time do I have to look at a new tool and maybe replatform? Sometimes you don't have time to replatform. Sometimes your team doesn't have the capabilities for a replatform or for an added tool. And sometimes you don't have enough of the pain. Like there has to be a great enough pain point, enough resource, enough runway, and enough capability.
Those are great answers. Anyone else in the audience, if you have questions, please just raise your hand and I will be sure to stop asking the questions here. But if not, I'll just keep going. As product leaders, right, I love this question when I'm in the audience, so hopefully someone here enjoys it as well. I always have been impressed with product leaders in large part because of the way that they're inspired and where they look for inspiration. You know, Pritham, you mentioned your Uber experience, right? So you're constantly thinking as a human being about every different way that you interact with the world. And what is the quote? Is the last best experience tends to be your expectation go forward. So maybe the audience would love to hear a little bit about, you know, Carrie or Pritham, whichever one wants to jump in, is where do you see inspiration just in general, whether it's a company, whether it's a human being, right, that drives a lot of that thinking? And because I think everyone is always looking for inspiration and tips. So I'm going to put the microphone out here and one of you all can grab it.
I think, starting with everyday experiences, right? Like, I look at Uber, I see a trend, I think about, hey, is this something that I can incorporate? Search-based pricing is one. You talk to peers who are either in your own field or in academia, right? And I know Carrie brought this up earlier. It's important to get the perspective of someone that's outside your sphere of influence or outside the working, operating environment that you're in, that can see the problem from a fresh perspective, right? And also academia is usually the place where it's more unconstrained and they're thinking about things at a much global and at a much different scale than what you are. So that's another great place. Blogs, journals, and papers and articles are a great place. But most importantly, when where I get, my day-to-day inspiration from is looking at trends and trying to synthesize them, right? So for example, if you're talking, we are in the business of giving out loans, which involves bringing the customer to the door, underwriting them, giving them a price, and giving them the loan that they want, or a higher amount or a lower amount. So there are various components to this process. When you look at each individual process, there might be things that you might find that are commonalities across the board, right? So zooming out and synthesizing across and constantly looking for data, even a speck of it can help you, I think, put things together. I don't think I'm doing it, but all our brains have like a magical way of doing things or creating those patterns that I think are very helpful. I find very helpful.
For sure. I know you've got a couple of places you go for the inspo. Yeah, and I'm one of those humans that is a super connector of dots and signals. So I am constantly seeking signal and looking for what people are working on outside of my sphere. So I'm super inspired by the work that some of the guys that are on a think tank that I'm on are doing in the areas that are completely apart from mine. So they're focused on genomics and cancer research and deep, narrow bands of the financial services industry, but they're working in spaces that I'm not working. And so I'm super inspired to see how they're applying methodologies and processes in their own work to see how I can look at it, how I can look through their lenses at what I'm working on. I take inspiration from the machine shop for my little brother's race car. There was like a couple years ago, I had him explain and send me home with this really cool screw that has, it's like designed to pop in and pop out super fast. Instead of like multiple twists, you like pop it in and pop it out. And it was one of those like moments of like, oh, this could be applied in code in this way. I could take this back to my data science team. Like from a design perspective, this is so elegantly designed, and it was on the floor of a machine shop. So I think we take inspiration from all different kinds of places. My siblings are all teachers, so I'm perpetually inspired by how they translate complex ideas for developing minds. That being able to translate is such a superpower in this space that I'm always inspired by educational tools, the tools to educate.
Those are great answers. Appreciate that. One of the things that I meant to bring up, and I think this is a little bit of a subjective question, but when it comes to personalization, right? So this is a topic, right? I think it really depends on a lot of different factors, but generally speaking, how do you all think about where the lines are, right, between personalized good, personalized great, personalized a little too much, right? It gets into a different territory. So I'm just going to put that one out there, so I make sure I don't forget this question, because this is one that I wanted to ask both of you, and I'll, again, just put the microphone out. Whoever grabs it.
I think personalization is an important aspect in most consumer-facing, companies and organizations. Why do I say that? Because it makes it like, when you go to maybe a restaurant or a hotel or any service-based organization, and if someone does something that you like or you prefer, you get a little bit of an attachment to that, no-brainer. But the question is, how do you, the big question for organizations is how do they get that right? And how do they do it so that it's not perceived by the customer in a wrong way, right? Like, some people have the reaction of, oh, great, this is totally customized for me. Some people are like, oh, wait, am I giving away too much data and information? So I think it's important to understand the distinction of who likes personalization versus who doesn't like personalization, right? There are tools and mechanisms and things that you can do to kind of understand the difference between the two. That is point number one. Point number two, I think, is as long as you collect enough data and you're able to build lookalike models of hey, this kind of a customer likes this kind of stuff, then you're able to port that over to a broader audience and kind of give them that treatment. That's fine. But in the absence of data, I think it becomes a challenge. And going back to my Uber example, Uber collects a lot of data on me before they make a switch in what they do, because they probably also know that I check Lyft after I check Uber, right? So it's important for organizations to understand the bounds of how far they can go to personalize, and what is causing the over personalization. In my case, if the price is too high, I switch to Lyft, and Uber probably understands that. Having, as an organization, building that kind of cross optimize, where you're thinking about personalization, building that kind of constraint in your models and optimizations can be really helpful and powerful.
I love how Dr. Genevieve Bell talks about the things that make technology sticky and the things that make humans human. And one of the things that she's talked about is how humans want to feel like they belong. And personalization is the manifestation of like extending to your humans the feeling of belonging. You belong here because, and I know something about you, and I'm remembering you. I'm remembering you because you belong. And where personalization breaks is when there is creepy bleed, where someone who shouldn't know about me knows about me because my data got shared. And when a product thinks it knows about me, but it really thinks that I'm a 72-year-old gentleman. And the creepy error, the creepy, like, not great data scenario, like, those are two like really interesting problems. Where I'm personally excited about what we're doing in the space of data science and around identity is the next generation of identity tools that sit in the decentralized identity space. And I'm excited about that space because right now, today, a couple of major companies hold my personalization data, and they share it with each other, or they resell it, and I've accepted terms of service that gave them that data, and now that data is being used to make things nicer for me as a human. And also, right now, today, I don't have a great way to sort of change my mind and say, like, I'd like to purge and start over, because you've got personalization that doesn't mean anything to me. Or I'd like to like purge and start over and do something different, make different elections. Right now, our human users we don't necessarily have the tools to give them the ability to purge and start over. We don't have the design paradigms that support that. And we haven't totally developed the tools that would let me, Carrie, have Carrie's data and let me like give you access to my personalization data for a time-banded period of time and then take it back. Either give it to you for this moment so that you could give me an in-moment experience, but not a like, hey, for the next 25 years, you've got my data. Like that, maybe that's not great. So what I'm excited about innovation in personalization personally is around the next generation of identity handling and where we will be able to provide experiences for people that aren't all or nothing, that aren't just like, here's all the data.
Great answers. Appreciate it. I think we're going to wrap it up here, but I want to just thank Carrie and Pritham for a great conversation, and yeah, round of applause for the guests. Thank you.